rainy UK. I wonder what the weather's like down under. Well, I think we've got somebody who can tell us. Richard Roberts, lifelong, wait for it, Tim, Arsenal fan, is with us today. Richard, hello.
Hey, Dotun, how are you?
Very well, thanks very much. I'm glad to hear that you don't go up at the end of your sentences after living in Australia.
I'm an Islington boy, born and bred. Yeah. Anfield, Edmonton, and now Sydney.
Enfield, Edmonton, actually is Tottenham territory. Indeed. To be honest, it was back in the day.
Islington born, but Edmonton bred. So I could watch the suffering at close hand.
Listen, in a way, you're fortunate enough to be by football supportership or whatever it is, because you can have a foot in each camp, as you've described there. How comes you ended up supporting Arsenal, even though White Hart Lane was your closest ground?
Surely it's got something to do with that Edmonton bread. He didn't like the bread in Edmonton, so he just stuck with Islington.
The bread in Edmonton made me run to the Waitroses in Islington.
Yes, there was a Waitrose there in the old days. There was also a Safeway. Do you remember that on the Holloway Road?
Oh yes. No, which is now there's a huge Sainsbury's in that location.
I don't know what it is there, mate, but that was the ultimate Safeways. It felt like you were going to America when you went shopping there, and Safeways was an American company anyway. Generally, it was an amazing supermarket.
Was it full of staff with T-shirts saying Team George Graham?
He's not going to let it go because he's got to watch Olympic football. He does like the Team GB business. Anyway, as intrepid listeners to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast will know, we always try and focus on an iconic game to talk about, and we also try and reflect on the circumstances of that game, sort of socially, culturally, and otherwise as well. And what a game we're going to talk about. Arguably, it was the game that made English football, at least the season in English football, worth watching, because it was down to the wire, literally down to the wire. This one, who was going to win what was then the First Division. This was pre-Premier League, if I'm correct. Pre-Premier League, and it was literally down to who was going to have the bottle to carry it off between Liverpool and Arsenal. So we're talking about the game, last game of the season, or arguably last kick of the season, is what we'll be discussing very soon as well. So it's the 26th of May, 1989, which was a Friday. Richard, what do you remember about that day, starting off from the morning?
Well, I was charged with getting us to Anfield, actually. So I had to go and pick up a minibus in Waltham Cross. And I was sitting there as they were talking on the radio about the game.
Waltham Cross, sorry to interrupt you, is also Tottenham territory, but we won't go into that just now.
and I had to go and pick up and the guy, they're talking about the game on the radio, and the guy there is going on, "You're not taking this up there, are you?" And I was like, no. This is the Vicar's Day Out kind of scenario. So, collecting all the guys, picking us up all on the way, and then sitting in traffic forever and a day. It was like, the context of the game is, it was like a month or so after Hillsborough, and that's why this game was delayed. It was like 2 weeks after the season had finished, and so collecting all the boys, putting some kit into the minibus, thinking we'd get up there early, have a game, have a bit of a kick around, show a bit of solidarity, and then sat in a traffic jam forever. So it's like that kind of seemed to be, and then everyone on the way telling us, "Good luck, but you're going to lose."
It's interesting that you mentioned that solidarity, because this was, for football fans, it was such a special moment, wasn't it? It was a moment that it hit so deep, and I well remember after Hillsborough, having the next days waiting at the tube station for a train. And it's come and it's gone, and I haven't even noticed, because I'm reading, I'm just looking at the photos, and all of us remembered when it could have happened to us. I had one that, by complete coincidence, Nick Hornby wrote about in Fever Pitch. It was 81, I think, first home game of the season for the Arsenal. against Southampton, 1980. That's right. Kevin Keegan had just come back. He was the biggest star in English football. So that Southampton were a huge draw. You know, Alan Ball and Mick Shannon, and a massive draw. And it was maybe a Tuesday night. It was Arsenal's first home game of the season, so it's massive for that as well. And I got caught up, 15-year-old, in the outside and between the roads and the ticket and the turnstiles. I got caught up, and honestly, I thought I was going to die. I was just terrified. There were people fainting around me, and there was old people saying, "I'm never coming again," and it was just terrifying. And Nick Hornby writes about exactly this in Fever Pitch, and we always had that feeling, but it would be all right in the end. And Hillsborough was the day when it wasn't all right in the end.
I remember I was at an Arsenal home game that day that semi-final was played. And I think we played Newcastle, and all we got, because it's, you know, pre everything, we're kind of just getting a vague thing and an announcement that the game has been delayed, and then there's, you know, the game has now been cancelled. And of course, everyone's reaction is like, what's happened now? You know, because you assume you have nothing other than that, and thinking, you know, what's happened now, and then the realization. And you talk about, there could have been us. I remember being at the League Cup semi-final replay in '87 at White Hart Lane. Yep. You know, in that away end where they sold the full allocation of tickets, but then also, you know, let people in on the night for whatever it was, and the chaos of those last few minutes in the Arsenal end, and it was pretty scary, you know. And you know, when Arsenal scored their first goal, and, you know, coming back to 1-1, my initial response wasn't to celebrate the goal; it was to get underneath the barrier I was stuck against, you know. And so I think that thing about Hillsborough is we could all relate to it.
Tottenham's first game afterwards was Everton, which team from the same city, and that was really emotional. I will never forget the minute silence as long as I live. I remember there was a kind of a door opening and shutting, and there were, you know, the fans were, the travelling fans, and were paying tribute to each other. This game, again, it's London versus Liverpool for the title at stake. What's the atmosphere like between the two sets of fans?
Look, before the game, it was quite amusing, because we had tried to get up there to play this game of football, and we turned up, and the first we get pulled over by the police just outside the ground. And the police are saying, "You're the first Arsenal supporters we've seen." And we're thinking, well, what's happened? We're panicking we're going to get there on time. And so, you know, we just haven't seen any supporters. What's going on? And we're like, well, there's chaos on the motorway. It was blockages everywhere. And so, amusingly, I'm saying, well, where are we going to park? Because, of course, all the Liverpool fans were there in the ground. Everything was buzzing. And where are we going to park? And the police officer said, "Oh, I've got a spot for you," and took us to the Anfield Road car park, opened the gate because they'd already closed it, and put us right on the inside of the gate and said, "Get here quickly after the game, lads, because you're blocking the exit." You know, so and so we had this prime parking spot, which, of course, before the game was great. Everyone's kind of laughing at us, and, you know, it was pretty lighthearted, you know, but subdued, absolutely subdued. You know, and you get into the ground, and a lot of respect. I mean, I don't know if you recall, the Arsenal players ran out with flowers to give to Liverpool fans, and there was this whole. It was late in May, 2 weeks after the end of the season, and I remember just looking up at the sky, which was kind of still daylight, you know, at that time of the evening. And so there's all these different things, these cues that normally it's nighttime, that it's, you know, pretty intense rivalry. And here's you know, for the first time in my life, we're playing for the title. I'd started going in '75, so this is my first title, and we're all sitting there standing there thinking, wow, you know, this could be the biggest night of our lives, and yet it just didn't feel it. You know, I think feel that intensity.
I think clearly it's important to remember that Hillsborough preceded this match by about 6 weeks. And what I remember from Hillsborough is the 6 o'clock news that night, where already the misinformation about what had happened had started creeping in. And as a young journalist till today, it haunts me quite seriously, the part that within hours, whilst there are still people fighting for their lives, the police are feeding. And as journalists, what information can we get but from the police? That's always the way, whether it be at a football match or it be at Notting Hill Carnival, you go to the police.
It's the biggest disgrace for a journalist to become a mouthpiece for someone.
Well, but Tim, you don't have any option because you can't see everything that's happening. The only option that you can give, the only official option that you can give is the one that is forwarded to you by the people who have got the most boots on the ground and are supposed to be officially coordinating, and that you expect to tell the truth as well. Usually, in those circumstances, what I've learned subsequently is that in those circumstances, you can only rely on the police to give you the facts about the number of arrests. That's all you can rely on, whether those arrests were legitimate or not, but that's all you can actually rely on. But I'm saying subsequent to that, or previous to that, we went to the police to say what happened, and they had already started giving this information. I wasn't a reporter at the time, so I'm just watching it on the television, but I'm hearing what still leaves me with a little bit of a shudder today, which is the misinformation. But 6 weeks on, at this match on the 26th of May 1989, what I remember, Richard, is that the whole country wanted Liverpool to win. The whole country, apart from you. Well, you weren't Gooners in those days, you were Gunners, weren't you?
Yeah, 3,000 people stuck in the corner there. Look, I and completely understand it because, like Tim was talking about the Everton-Tottenham game earlier there, and of course you used to play the opposite rival. So this game was scheduled for the Saturday after Hillsborough. So it was scheduled for that same weekend. And I remember looking at my ticket pinned up on the wall thinking, is that game ever going to happen now? And I just didn't care if it did or not, because we'd all been in those moments. And of course, at that point, I think Liverpool hadn't gone on that run. So we were top of the league by quite a few points. And if the league had got pulled on that day, I don't think we would have cared. It was just like, we get the title, not get the title, wherever. I just don't think we would have cared. And, going up there, we're going into the Lions' den, but none of us are going there thinking that whole, we're going to get this. We're just going there to watch a game now and just have that experience, and whatever happens. Because, Dotun, you're absolutely right. I think the country wanted Liverpool to win, apart from, pockets of North London. And there's a few Everton fans, I guess,
Do you know where I was?
Where were you then?
My publishing empire had just collapsed. So I'd moved in between Hillsborough and this. I'd moved to a settee in a flat of a mate of mine, Aberdeen Road, Highbury.
I know exactly. My younger brother lived on Aberdeen Road, actually.
I lived in Aberdeen Road. Remember, I was saying I grew up as a child. I lived in Aberdeen Road, and then Balbrook Street. So all around that area, around the ground.
One of my main memories of this whole summer is because it's very close to the Highbury Barn, and very close to Highbury itself. No, you used to be able. I did go to Highbury whenever I could.
It's all blocked off now. The roads are all blocked off around there. You have to go around in circles to get out of it. Trust me.
But I remember an entire long hot summer, because 89 was a long hot summer. An entire long hot summer of them all in the Highbury Barn going Arsenal, Arsenal, Arsenal all summer long.
I've had my younger brother, before he moved to Aberdeen Road, he had a flat in Drayton Park, between Holloway Road and Caledonia Road, and it was like on a council estate. Every single person on the council estate was a gooner, every single person. And I used to just keep my own sort of council, walk up and down, because as you may have gathered, Richard, I was brought up on the other side of North London. So I just used to creep in and out, but you could literally hear Highbury, the old Highbury. So you must be able to hear even louder now. You know, the new Emirates Stadium.
Oh yeah, that's right there at Dresden Park. The new
exactly.
stadium.
But you could hear when the Gooners scored. You could definitely hear it from. I remember some guy coming up to me. Hey, come on, we scored! We scored! I was wondering what on earth is he talking about, and I suddenly remembered myself. Oh my goodness, I'm in Gooner territory.
But I will now explain, Richard, why I wasn't distraught with the result. Which
Sorry,
is because why I wasn't distraught with the result. It's because I'd come out of college 2 years. I went to college in the Midlands. And one of the things I used to do in order to avoid any work was organise North versus South football matches. And we got it all the time. All the time. Soft South, soft South, soft South. So there was almost some kind of vicarious pleasure in seeing George Graham in a side where he's got to win by 2 goals, picking Steve Bold at number 10. Yeah. It's so gloriously old-fashioned Arsenal. I mean,
and it was such an obscure thing. Like, I can remember that was the reaction that we all gave when we, you heard the team being announced. Someone's going, Steve Bold, number 10. It's like, what's the plan? At
number 10,
or 2 goals.
Our cultured playmaker. He will decorate your ankles. But it is, I think, an important game in the sense that the North was, without doubt, the capital of English football. When you look at the times that since the war that London had won the title, there was the Tottenham push and run side of 51, the greatest of them all in my view. Chelsea won it in 55, the Tottenham double side in 61, the Arsenal side in 71, and that's it. Yeah. Charlie George, what a delighted scorer.
It was 18 years. And randomly, there was this stat, which I'd kind of worked out, that every 18 years from when we first won a title in the 30s, we were winning the league. And it was 18 years since 71. And so we were due. Sitting there thinking, so you're looking for these little cues.
See, that used to work with the year ending in 1. But when you get into the 21st century, it seems to lose its power. Yeah. And then subsequently, you get, especially with the rise of Chelsea, London now competes. It's fallen behind Man City a little bit recently, but it competes. And this 89 triumph is the first big one. And Arsenal won again and nearly won the double in 91. That was a good side, although I think they got found out against Benfica.
Yes,
in the European Cup. And that was like... But then when the Premier League money comes in and a lot of the foreign players really want to go to London, then London becomes somewhere that can compete with Liverpool and Manchester. But in 89, that wasn't the way, certainly, that the rest of the country saw it. It was soft South.
Do you not think, though, that this is 89 was the end of an era because you brought in Premier League money? We're going to talk about Sky later on coming in from the margins of broadcasting. And as David Lacey said in the day before in The Guardian, he said, tonight Liverpool face an Arsenal team who need to win by 2 goals to bring the title to London for the first time since 1971, since Arsenal have lost on their last 7 league visits to Anfield and have never really recaptured the drive from midfield that they showed at Liverpool in the Littlewoods Cup. Remember that? It's hard to see them pulling off a surprise tonight. And that is a seasoned football commentator. Nobody thought Arsenal stood a chance, except certainly for George Graham. And he pulled off a masterstroke.
There was a cue earlier in the season, though, that we played them in the League Cup up at Anfield. Okay, and it's kind of like the first time we really get to see players like Dixon and that coming into the team. And we drew 1-1 and we were ahead in that game. And it went to 1-1, then it came back to Highbury and that game was drawn. And we went to a third game. And the League Cup in those days mattered. Everyone played. Barnes was in their team. It was all the big shot players. And so I think that game was a game. And of course, we'd beaten them in the final a couple of years earlier as well, when when Ian Rush had
Charlie Nicholas
scored the 2 goals, Ian Rush. So there was a bit of toing and froing between the 2 clubs at this point. Okay. And they weren't dominating us like they were dominating the league, but they were definitely the marker, you know. But so we'd been to Anfield that season, and I was there, and it was a Wednesday night, and we played them off the park for an hour or so, you know, and this young team that we put out. So I get what you say, Dotun, but in us, there was a thing that's saying, there's something rubbing here. So when we went up there, look, 2-0, we weren't expecting that. In fact, I dug up a stat that we hadn't won at Anfield since like 74 or something, you know, like 10 defeats and 3 draws. And, you know, no team had won there. I remember reading in the programme when I got back, which I didn't know, no team had won there by 2 goals in 5 years. So it was kind of stacked against us. But, you know, when we weren't lambs to the slaughter as much. And George Graham said this, that no one believes in us, that's fine. Because we'd seen what the team was capable of earlier that season.
I remember seeing the Arsenal. This is 86, the end of the 85-86 season. I think it was at Watford. And Donny Howe had just been sacked. I remember that because the Arsenal fans were singing his name. And they got beat easily that night. But you could see there's a generation there who are really useful. Michael Thomas played right back that night, which was his original position. A young pair of centre-backs, Tony Adams and Martin Keown, you know, thinking they're useful. And there was one who just stood out so much, which was David Rocastle. You know, so even though I'm on the opposite side, I followed his career because, you know, when you see him early, you think they're almost like, yeah. But I could also see that if he didn't improve his left foot, he wasn't going to be it, because once defenders got to know him, they could just shunt him onto his left, because his left foot wasn't good enough for getting on the bus, really. And once he got known, his effectiveness, and he tailed off very early in his career. He was brilliant for 2 or 3 years. At this time, when you're going up there, is he still the star of the side?
He's the hope for us. Merson's kind of coming through a little bit at this point in 89 too. So there's these couple of random players that we don't know well enough, like what Merson can do. We know he can do something, you know. Rocastle is the go-to player, absolutely. You know, you want him on the ball if at all possible. You know, Thomas is going to drive that midfield forward. But you also the other thing that we knew, you mentioned Tony Adams there, that Graham had already established a solid defence, you know, and so we kind of, even though we didn't know we were going to become the old 1-0 to the Arsenal, because we were the top scorers in the league this season that we're talking about, you know, there was something happening, and you know, if you compare it to modern days, I'm looking at Smith Rowe, and I'm looking at Saka, and I'm looking at Martinelli, and I'm thinking, I've got that same feeling about these kids right now that I had in the mid-'80s, you know? And I just hope that Arteta can see this, because, of course, Graham was a man of the club, and he was going to get rid of those stars.
Till he went to Tottenham.
Look, he won a trophy for them, Dotun. He won a trophy for them.
What were we thinking of? And George Graham would never have picked him. He was one of those managers who would never have picked himself. Never.
Yeah, absolutely. Complete contrast. You know, he was a flair player, and here he is. He's wanting these players to. So he gets rid of Nicholas. He gets rid of Steve Williams. He gets rid of these players that he's got there. And he builds a team around these youngsters. And I'm hoping Arteta's brave enough to do that right now, because, you know, someone that's seen this thing, I'm seeing something at the moment in these young players that really draws a parallel to that mid-'80s period. And
I think it is worth exploring that parallel later on in this conversation as well, to see what Arsenal can offer up nowadays. Let's not forget that they had tried and tested, always reliable and brilliant journalist as he is now, Alan Smith up front as well. When you've got him on the pitch,
it's his game, isn't it? Really,
it's amazing, isn't it? For him, it's absolutely amazing.
I'd forgotten, because I hate him so much for scoring that goal against Parma. You know, it's the most depressing, horrible. And well,
Richard doesn't agree with you, as you saw a moment ago.
Yeah, when you do that game, I can talk about that one too.
I did meet him, and I said, Alan, I said some horrible things to you from the terraces of White Hart Lane, and I would like to take this opportunity to take some of them back, and he took that one very well. My favourite Alan Smith story actually comes from when he was still at Leicester with Lineker. And Lineker's like almost a Brummie, isn't he? But he's got that thing of like the almost Brummies do, which is to take the piss out of Brummies. He said this once on live TV, but I've confirmed it with him since. That there were once they were playing in a game against Leicester, and Smith was in trouble with the referee. So Smith walked across the referee and he said, "Excuse me, referee, are you aware of my disciplinary record?" But he was good, wasn't he? I mean,
look, you could play that ball into him at any pace, at any angle, at any height, and it stuck like glue. And, he would then hold the ball up and bring the players in. And that's why, for example, someone like Merson emerging was a great thing, because that runner, the speed of that runner coming to him, and the youthful exuberance of that player, he could hold the ball up and lay it off straight away and then go and finish it. When it comes back to him. So yeah, absolutely. He was the linchpin of that attack that season. That play that ball sticks.
And of course, you had a solid defence, not least with Nigel Winterburn, who I think is underrated in many.
I remember so much the 1991 FA Cup final. When you get them all together, and the Arsenal fans going to the stadium singing Nigel Winterburn, Lee Dixon. They're singing about their fullbacks. What's the matter with these people? I don't know. Joy in their lives.
I remind you, it was the semi-final, okay? Because you beat us to get to the final. Or did you want me to say that? Is that what it is? I was at the end, and when that Gascoigne free kick happens, because that's the game that he hits that ball. And I just remember looking at him and he's sizing it up. And you get that moment and you just think, hang on a minute. And I looked at the flags and I'm thinking, there's one hell of a wind out there and it's blowing right at us, which was the direction that ball was about to come. And I'm thinking, and I remember saying, if he catches this, and I didn't even finish my sentence.
I remember talking not a couple of days before the game, to an old Arsenal fan who I knew at the time, who said, you know what, I'm a bit worried because you've got two world-class players and we haven't really, we've got potentially one. Do you know who he was talking about?
At that point, you're talking about the fullbacks. No, look, I have no idea. I reckon he probably was thinking about Tony Adams.
No, David Hillier.
Ooh.
It's just so Arsenal mentality that
I don't know who David Hillier is. I can't remember.
But he was just little.
No, he probably thinks Ian Snelly's the greatest player ever. Then.
But and by the way, one thing that I did that came to mind, it's quite amusing actually, which is quite decisive in the outcome of this match, is that you could still back pass to the goalie. And it made me laugh to watch that. It's been so long since we saw that, but it's very important to the outcome of this. We'll get to the outcome in a moment. Now, this is what George Graham said in his team talk. Keep it tight. I can't do the Scottish accent.
Yeah,
Keep it tight.
It's up to the others to come out and play against us.
Don't let them settle. Pressure all over the field.
Game.
I won't be too disappointed if it's 0-0 at half time.
He wouldn't have been disappointed if it was 0-0 at full time.
No, he would have been, because he had a game plan, you see. He reasoned that if Liverpool scored first, Arsenal's heads might drop. If it was goalless at the interval, doubts might creep into Liverpool's play. And if Arsenal nicked a goal early in the second half, doubt could turn to panic. And Liverpool, on the other hand, didn't quite know how to approach the game, because, if they were trying to avoid getting beaten by two clear goals, then should they just sit back and let Arsenal come at them and just put 11 men in front of the goal mouth, as it were? And that was part of the undoing or the unravelling of this match. It was 0-0 at half time. Everything changed then, Richard, at the beginning of the second half. Yeah,
now there's a free kick. It's where I'm just slightly to the side in line with the penalty area. So the seats are behind the goal, and like for the away fans, and I'm alongside what is now in the Kenny Dalglish stand. and we're just down there, and there's a free kick. And ball comes in. Alan Smith clearly hits the most bullet header you've ever seen in your life. Okay, changing the direction of the ball. I had no idea what the Liverpool players were complaining about. So Smith heads the ball in, as we discussed, and we're celebrating. And then suddenly we have to stop because the referee's having a conversation with his linesman. And you remember the Liverpool players in those days, relentlessly at the referee and the linesman. So we're sitting there thinking, oh God, here we go. This is going to, this is going to be chalked off. You're expecting that goal to be disallowed, but we had no idea what the argument was, because particularly from where I was, right in line with that, he was clearly onside. So I'm thinking it's not an offside issue. There's something else, And of course, subsequently, we learned that they were trying to say that big mark on his head there where he redirected the ball hadn't actually happened.
There was a long conversation between the ref and the linesman. I
watched it again. It was
ages and ages. I think it's Steve McMahon getting in the referee's face, and even after he's made the decision, going after him to give him a few more.
They were so good at it because as you watch that, they're all at him. They're all at the referee, and the referee goes to the linesman. And David O'Leary is the only Arsenal player that comes across to find out what's going on. And even then, I think Ronnie Whelan guides him away. So it's like all Liverpool players at the referee and the linesman, and no Arsenal player can get a word in.
And you've got all the Liverpool fans as well, not helping the situation.
And the fans, exactly where that was all going. And the benches are there as well. And so like when you look at it now, the referee was obviously saying, "No, how was that burger you had at lunchtime today?" Because they wanted to make it look really good, but it was clearly like this header, like header.
You can actually read their lips. You can actually read their lips.
Oh, can you?
Yeah, you can.
What's the burger like?
Too much relish.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Well done. So was it a handball or not?
Oh no, that wasn't about a handball. I think the argument was it was an indirect free kick, and had Smith touched the ball? That's what their argument was about.
I think really the argument was the ball ended up in the back of their net.
Yeah, and they don't like that.
No, what can we protest about? No.
No, nobody likes that.
It wasn't about a handball. It wasn't about an offside. I found out later it was about had Smith headed the ball. And he just had a big mark on his head at that point from where he barely touched it.
Everything will be used in evidence against him. But that does change the nature of this game. And suddenly Liverpool do start to panic, just as George Graham had predicted. They start to panic. They start playing football, actually, to be fair to them. But they're still caught between, should we just defend that 1-0 or should we just defend the 0-1, as it were, or should we start attacking? And I think because they're caught out, they're not using some of their best players, because John Barnes, for example, he just seemed to be out of sorts in this game. He didn't seem to be effective in any way, shape or form. And then they lose Ian Rush. John Aldridge, was he useful in this game? I don't know. Peter Beardsley comes on and he is ineffective as well. It's a game of, I suppose, not deciding how you want to play or who you want to play on the ball, whereas Arsenal are single-minded about what they want to do, which is to get another goal.
Yeah, I read a quote from Ray Houghton, I think it was, who said, "How do you play a game that you don't need to, that you can afford to lose 1-0? And what do you do?" And I think you're right. And those names that you're reeling off there, and the Liverpool team of the 80s, and I'd grown up watching them in the 70s, they were the benchmark, and those names you're reeling off. And it's like, how did they not play that night? It was, and they would have been used to the pressure. And the pressure, as I said to you earlier, the pressure in the ground that night wasn't really there. And maybe that was part of the thing, that the tension wasn't there, because there were other things that the supporters were thinking about, and their minds were obviously really distracted by what had happened 6 weeks earlier. Still, there was a lot of emotion around.
But George Graham was shouting "shoot, shoot, shoot" every time one of these players got the ball anywhere near the goal mouth. What was Kenny Dalglish doing, Tim? He should have been on that pitch, or at least on the edge of the pitch. The only effective thing that I've read that he did was when the ball came out of touch, to wind down the clock, he threw the ball back. It came to him out of touch. He threw the ball back to just hit the edge of the pitch. So it bounced back towards him again to waste a couple of extra seconds. But with all due respect to Kenny Dalglish, maybe he had other things on his mind, but he doesn't seem to have had a game plan in the way that George Graham did.
No.
I'm arguing this from the position of somebody who knows that George Graham has not got the best of reputations in terms of being a great tactician or anything like that. In fact, it would have been Kenny Dalglish who'll be the more seen as a more successful manager, but yet he does seem totally ineffective there as well.
Well, George knew what he was trying to do. And he was relentless and ruthless. And I suspect that he had his back five still out on the pitch, 45 minutes after the final whistle, still drilling them and saying, it's up to the opposition to come out and play against us. Those clicked. Is it Edinburgh tones that he's from? Dalglish took a lot of Hillsborough on, didn't he?
Yeah.
He went to a lot of funerals and so on. And I think Rich is he was there. I think spot on with that, the unreality of the occasion.
The night didn't feel like the occasion. The occasion that everyone's watching is this title decider, and a record TV audience, 40,000 people in the ground. It's this big occasion. It's spawned these films and books and everything, but actually in the ground, it never felt like that. It never, like I'm saying, the edge. From our perspective, look, we went on the pitch, and as you say, George, we played our game. And we had a plan, but the edge in the crowd wasn't quite there from their perspective. And I think that was also then playing itself out in the players. And the hesitancy that suddenly comes at 1-0 starts to play out more and more.
But we're going towards injury time. And one of your midfielders, you've used your subs, and Kevin Richardson is down with cramp. Have you given it up?
Look, Mickey Thomas had a chance about 15 minutes before time from where we were. He looked like he was clear through on the edge of the area, and he hit it straight at Grobbelaar. And that we thought was our chance, because you don't get many. And so you're going into that injury time, and you can't tell because, there was no clock in Anfield. It's still daylight. The sky is still kind of, like surreally like violet and not dark yet. And then suddenly the police start lining the pitch, and you're thinking, oh, here we go.
That's always a sign, isn't it? Yeah, time's run out.
We're running short of time, and then, as you say, Kevin Richardson goes down, and it's cramp, and we're just looking at each other. And I should say that my uncle, who I'd gone to games with, from when I was a young child, had taken me to games. He had died during this season, okay, and it was an emotional thing. And all I'm thinking is, I'm looking up to him, thinking, one goal, we're one goal. Give me a goal. And of course, we hadn't won the league, and I'm thinking we might never get this close ever again. This could be it. And Kevin Richardson's going down, and we're thinking, right. And look, as I mentioned, I don't think we would have been upset because of what had happened. I don't. We really desperately wanted this, but if that had ended like that, because in those last few moments when Richardson's gone down, the ground is singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," and we're joining in. It's this incredible emotion going on, and in and around the stadium, and they're taking the team home. And McMahon's walking around doing his 1 minute, which we didn't see, of course, in the stadium, but he's walking around doing his 1 minute. Liverpool, he's instructing them to kick the ball to the corner flag while all this is happening. And all we're thinking is, just give us this goal. But the reality is, you're watching 3/4 of the stadium in tears, singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," and we're there with them. And so, if that's it, that's it. I'll take that. It's an incredible memory. We'll do it again next year, whatever it might be.
This is one of the ironies of this match, that it has so much resonance, not just looking back to Hillsborough, but also looking forward to what happens to the Football League in England afterwards. It arguably was the game, as I said earlier on, that made English football in terms of, or English league football or English league championships, because there is no way you could have scripted that an entire season would be down to the last kick of the season. There's no way it could have been scripted. And I think people looking overseas would have got the drama as much as we got the drama. You said it had record viewing figures. It's because everybody knew the drama of Hillsborough as well, but also the drama of, hang on a second, and these were the days, it's become sort of, because it happened with Man City, it's happened a couple of times since then now, that the league has decided on the last game of the season, but then it was incredibly rare, and the last kick of the season as well. How on earth? Because I think actually the earlier chance that you mentioned that Michael Thomas had, that was the easier chance.
Yeah.
And he scuffed it.
Look, absolutely. When that, like I say, you didn't get many chances against that Liverpool team. And, you know, like we played them, I think we played them 3 times in that League Cup game, plus in the league. So that's 4. So this is our 5th game against them that season. And we kind of know that they're all tight games. They're all being decided by one little thing. And when he gets that chance, is that the one little thing that says it's 1-0 and that's how it's going to finish, you know? And because, as you say, I think that was the easier chance.
But then he gets this other chance where you can watch it over and over again. Everybody remembers this, by the way. You know, people who aren't Arsenal fans, people who were around.
It's up for grabs now.
That's right. That was a commentary, wasn't it?
That's it. Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned Richardson going down. You get those moments where things happen in slow motion. Lee Dixon playing that ball to Alan Smith, you know, like it happens in slow motion. You're watching it, you're there, but it's kind of not happening. Because like
this is from the goalie, obviously, but from the back pass of the goalie, and the goalie kicked it out to Lee Dixon.
Yeah. You know, absolutely. So the goalkeeper is yourself talking about the back pass. So yes, there's a back pass, and then the goalie, I think, throws it out to Dixon, and Dixon takes it, and you know, I've heard what some of the players were saying to each other and stuff, and Dixon plays it long up to Smith, and it's like you're watching it in slow motion because you know there's no time. You've taken 1-0. You're not expecting anything here. And then Smith kind of controls it and it gets this bounce. And Thomas again is through the same from where we are. He's in the same spot again to the chance that he's missed. And we're thinking, you know, you're just holding and you don't know. You're thinking, but you don't know what you're thinking. And suddenly it's in the back of the net and the world turns to chaos, absolute chaos where we are, you know. And we're looking around. We don't know whether we can jump up and down. We don't even know if we've really seen this. We've all seen it, but it doesn't feel real, you know. And that goal just happened in slow motion. And to me, certainly, and I could remember all of the build-up, you know, Lukic to Dixon to Smith through to Thomas. And it's just one of those moments that's embedded here. And it's never going away. 26th of May, 1989. You know, you don't have to tell me the date. I know it, you know.
Is this the biggest high that football has ever given you?
It's an interesting question. I think so. I think we got to the Champions League final and we scored that goal with 10 men. I was in Paris, luckily enough. And that was an amazing moment. At half time, we're all in disbelief. They're thinking, God, we were 10 men and we're 1-0 up here. But I you know, you get those moments. But because
I've given Belletti my compliments on winning that game.
Yes, well, I'm sure you have many times. But you know, and look, there was a lot of suffering involved in that game. I'm sure you know. But in thinking about, like I say, you don't know if that moment's ever going to happen again before we get the goal. If we're ever going to get to that point. And I can't, like you said, there is so much attached to that moment. If he misses, none of us are here. Fever pitch doesn't happen. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and it's just another Liverpool title.
Yeah,
very good point. It was a great goal, though, Tim, wasn't it? I don't know if
fabulous piece of midfield play. It's fabulous. I mean, the engine there, just to get, you know, this is right at the end of an intense game, at the end of the season, and the engine to get him there. But then so many players miss these. And I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he managed to, in that moment, to stay so calm. and chip it over the goalkeeper. So many players blast it straight at the goalkeeper. Goalkeepers quite like these situations. Yeah, he'd done that a few minutes earlier in the game. I remember thinking at around that time, what a phenomenon he was going to be. I remember at the start of the next season, I mean, you beat us again, and he was wonderful in that game. He was just a boss of the midfield. And then a couple of months later, I saw him for England at Wembley against Yugoslavia, and he didn't get a kick. He didn't get a kick. No, Stojkovic, and they just passed the ball around him, and he was rushing here and rushing there, and he was never. And I sometimes wonder if he was ever quite the same player again. It's like that moment when you go up the level and you find out you're not quite as good as you think you were.
Yeah, and I think you said the same thing about Rocky, that there's those few seasons there where things really went and they came through together. And the team, this was quite a young team in some respects that George Graham had built. And, unexpected success. And then we'd won the league again 2 years later. And I think we'd only lost one game that season, when we won it in 91. And so you suddenly... And we go on and win the 2 cups in 93 and also the Cup Winners' Cup in 94. And so there's an element of success in there, but the team's constantly chopping and changing. So you end up with Hillier in the team and the guy, Tony Adams, dropped his name, escapes me, in scoring the winning goal in the League Cup final. And those players have gone by this time. Yes, Steve Morrow, that's it. And those players are kind of gone by this point. As in they're there for this brief period. Merson's still around at this
Ian
time.
Allinson.
Ian Allinson, 87.
Ian. Oh, how many times?
Well, as we spoke, that was the goal we spoke about. Where all I'm thinking about is getting under the barrier when he scores that goal. Because it was, and it was just crazy. And I think Rocastle scored the winner in that game, if I remember.
It's interesting you talk about the barrier, because even in this game that we're talking about, May the 26th, 89, you see the cop sway. You see it sway. And remember, I don't remember that many games at the Lane when it was just so heaving that your feet weren't touching the floor. Yeah. But that was a common terrace experience, wasn't it?
And look, if you look at the Arsenal corner of supporters on that night, and when they scored the first goal, I think the players run over there. And there's a whole section of the crowd who would have been trying to celebrate who couldn't move. They were rammed in against, because there's that big exit there in this terraced area, in that corner of the ground. And you can even see it then, that there's a lot of Arsenal supporters who would want to be celebrating a goal who actually can't move.
Yeah, whilst you lot were concerned about whether you'd be the First Division champions or not, there were other footballing concerns, notably...
Before we leave the game, what was the reaction of the Liverpool fans? Final whistle.
At the final whistle, as I said, they were singing "You Never Walk Alone." It's a big round of applause. They didn't leave. I remember them not leaving. I remember there was a lot of respect both ways around this. We were really ecstatically happy, but not going over the top. I remember walking out of the ground to then suddenly remember, oh my God, where we parked the van.
I was about to say, for goodness sake, the cops are waiting.
Getting to the Anfield Road car park, and all of these cars are hooting away, and this cop's like standing in front of the van. It's not the same guys. He doesn't know what's happened. But walking towards the minibus, for example, this has stuck with me forever. This huge Liverpool supporter, big skinhead, walks. I can see him walking up. And we're walking in the opposite direction, and he's walking on this side of the police line, and we're walking on that side of the police line. And he bursts through the police line and walks right at me. And I'm like, oh my God, what's about to happen? And he stuck his hand out and shook my hand and said, only one team deserved to win it tonight. And only one team seemed to want to win it. And I was like, well, thank you. And, like running away. But we, like for example, it was, There was a lot of respect both ways. There was no celebrating from the Arsenal supporters in and around the stadium. We got in that minibus, got on the motorway, and pulled off at the first service station, just to think, right, let's let loose here. And of course, we got there, and then about 10 minutes later, there's about 20,000 people on this forecourt celebrating. And poor guy behind the counter, like, I'm trying to pay for my fuel. I was genuinely trying to pay for the fuel. He closed up everything. Take what you want, go. And so, like, not only did we win the league, but we got a free ticket fuel to London.
You gooners are so flipping canny.
And then we realised, like, as we left that service station, and there was this big party on the forecourt. Every service station we went through that was on that section of the road, the police had closed off because that was being repeated. They closed ours off, so they'd gone to the next one, because we didn't want to be celebrating in Liverpool. We had to get out of there. We felt a duty to leave the city before we could celebrate, because of what had happened. And I would like to think that was noticed by the Liverpool fans. And I've noticed that they look at Arsenal, when I've spoken to them, we've been up to away games up there, and they said that you are a club that have tried to do it the right way, like, meaning, you earn your money, you buy your players, you bring through the youth. And that's also, to that point, has been a Liverpool way too. But it was this big coming together of two historic clubs, the north-south thing. It was a big change around the game. But I think the surrealism around this whole thing, talking about the reaction of the Liverpool fans, everything was just so different that it was almost like that dawn of a new age, where something gives, and that perfect storm of events. And, then 2 years later, you got the Premier League.
Yeah, Torquay United fans were more interested in their date with destiny at the Sherpa Van Trophy final a couple of days later on Sunday, and the most noted of their fans at this time was the comedian Peter Cook. A photograph of him here emerging from the Private Eye offices, looking not particularly happy, but then he's just been sued by the wife of the Yorkshire Ripper, sued successfully, not him personally, but the Private Eye organisation. And he's looking very cool and dapper, though, the way that you sometimes look, Tim. So I want to talk about some of the issues socially and politically at the time. Mrs. Thatcher, of course, was Prime Minister at this time, as you'll remember, Richard. Do you remember how much a Ford Escort cost at this time, roughly speaking, within the nearest £1,000? I'll take.
I would say lucky if it was £2,000.
1989. Are you having a laugh?
I don't know. I've got no idea.
Have another guess. Go on.
Like new or in Waltham Cross?
No, brand new.
I don't know. 3995. I have no idea.
3995. That's not a bad guess, Tim. What would you go for?
No, I'm not. I'm a non-driver. I've got no idea.
Well, still after all these years. Yeah. Well, we're talking about £6,312 for a brand new Ford Escort at the time. It wasn't the best of the series, by the way. It was quite an ugly one, but nevertheless, that's what it cost. Front page of the papers at the time, Gorbachev elected by secret vote. First time the Soviet Union, as it was then, had gone to a sort of a vote to elect a leader, because previously a leader kind of emerged, or whoever was the most adept at running the KGB sort of emerged. But this time they elected Gorbachev. And so we're looking at the unraveling there of Eastern Europe as well at this momentous time in 1989. We'll come on.
It was a really influential match, wasn't it? Like a lot of things. It changed a lot of things.
Well, yeah, maybe not the match, but
are you trying to give the arse credit for bringing down the?
It's the fall of communism. Mickey Thomas and the Fall of Communism. Haven't you read that book, Tim?
Good question. And I was wondering why you'd been calling your lot the Arsenal all this podcast. I was waiting for the other side of him to go.
They are the Arsenal, aren't they?
It is. You're quite correct.
It should have the definite article.
Yeah. Okay. This
is a mark of respect for the arse.
This is what David Lacey wrote in The Guardian the day after. Arsenal won the league championship last night and denied Liverpool their second double in 4 seasons because when it mattered most, they marched towards the sound of the guns. Yeah, the title's never been decided in more dramatic circumstances and amid such scenes of high excitement. I think he nailed it there. I think he nailed it, in that sentence. When it mattered most, it was the Arsenal that showed their colours, not the other lot,
Yeah, no, we were talking about that game plan previously. And that actually, even if there wasn't a game plan, because of all the things we've spoken about earlier, there was one team, probably fair to say, that was able to stand up in front of the guns and charge towards them, because maybe the scenario and the legs had gone off those players that they were facing. It's one of those scenarios where, because they had gone on an incredible run to get to that point, whereas we had lost at home to Derby and drew at home to Wimbledon in the last few games of the season, and kind of felt we'd blown it, And so, yeah, I think that is a really great capture of what it felt like on that night, that there was a team that was capable, but could they do it?
And I mentioned as well the changing of the times. Sky Television, the satellite venture owned by Rupert Murdoch at the time, was waiting in the wings to get more subscribers. Initially, they'd gone through thinking that it was through Sky Movies that they would get more subscribers. So they were buying up the likes of British Satellite Broadcasting, BSB. I think they bought them maybe a year or two after this point. They're the ones with the square aerial rather than the round aerial. But they also know the significance of sport. And
I think around that time, just a few months earlier, before the collapse of my publishing empire, I was at the BBC trying to do scripts for Rory Bremner. It's the moment when I realised I really couldn't make a living that way. But anyway, it was the precise moment when Sky was launched, and all of the TV people there were just rolling around laughing at it because of the technical quality of the programs. And I remember thinking then, they're going to do you with sport. They're going to do you with live sport. Live sport is going to be the big driver.
Sorry to interrupt, Tim. Sorry. I think, Don, I hear what you're saying there, and I agree that thing about film subscriptions. I remember that. You're absolutely right. And it didn't work. But there's that great quote from Murdoch going into Boardroom when Sky are trying to work out what we do. And he walks in and says, there's three things that are going to make this a success. It's football, football, and football. And
so he knew.
He knew.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why they then started, they had a clear directive from him, go get it.
I think this match as well was an indication of just how many people were prepared to tune in and to pay for football, actually, just because it was the most dramatic of all it was worth following an entire season of football to get to this dramatic conclusion. That's what Sky have made their name on. It's kind of like, hang on, this is a competition. Every stage of this competition is important. Whereas in the old days, we thought, okay, apart from the teams you support, we duck in and out. When there's a kind of an important match like an FA Cup final, we'll duck in there. When there's an important match like a League Cup final, we'll duck in there. But you didn't necessarily follow the entire league for the entire season. I couldn't have told you what, Stoke City were doing, for example. I couldn't have told you. I didn't really care. And would I watch one of their matches? Okay, because we had so little TV, football on TV in those days was either Match of the Day or On the Ball, was it, on ITV or whatever it was. And that's the only reason that I even knew other teams existed, was because they put together a compilation of it. But what Sky have done is say every single stage of this season is an important stage. That's where they make their money, because you get hooked to it. You need to know the drama of the lower teams or the newly promoted teams as much as the ones that are facing relegation and so on. A really decisive moment for football, this match.
Yeah, they got lucky twice, didn't they? They got lucky with this match. No one could have scripted this drama. This could not have been presented as fiction. So they got lucky with this, which did something to take the sour taste in your mouth. Because I remember after Hillsborough thinking, I don't want to go into a football stadium. And then I did, as a kind of religious thing the next week or the next game. But you still, but this match, it did a lot to take the sour taste out, although the tragedy remains and the senseless loss of life remains. And then they had the 1990 World Cup, which did so much to remind people of why they'd love football in the first place, or to make new people fall in love with the game. And so, I mean,
I think with what Dotun's saying there, and what you're saying as well, people would always say to me, like, the drama of football, that game, this game, that game, those individual games. But it's like, why do you go to all the games? And I would say to them, well, I've been a season ticket holder up until relatively recently, even though I've been here for 20 odd years, why do you go to all the games? And it's like, well, it's like you're going to a play. You can't walk out of one act. Yeah. The whole season, as Dotun was describing there, it's a story from start to finish, and this season starts with a big win at Wimbledon and ends at Anfield. And if you're a supporter and you miss a bit of it, you kind of miss an act and you think, well, where are we at now? What's happened? And I think that's, I've always been trying to explain to people why it mattered that you went to all the games and why I was a season ticket holder for so many years. And it's just like, it is a play from start to finish. In the Nick Hornby writes in Fever Pitch, if you die during a season, do you know how it ends? And it kind of feels like that, to me. That kind of, that's like a quote that I kind of, that I often think about, and I often wonder, God, if I died in the season, do I know if we win anything?
Mm-hmm. I always. It's such a good observation. I always think when you hear of somebody dying who's a lifelong such and such a fan, you always think, oh my goodness, they died before the end of the season. They'll never know how that season panned out for their team.
It was great because it's one of those things that we randomly, as supporters, I'm sure we all think about, and then Nick's written it in his book, and it's just like, yeah, I get that.
What's it like for you now, living so far away? I mean, that connection of not missing any of the acts. Now you're missing out on so much of the local context. And what's that like for you?
Look, it's a lot easier now than it was. When I first came here, like just 20 odd years ago, it was really hard to even get the results sometimes pre-internet. You kind of wait 2 or 3 days and you might get a line in the paper that gave you the results of the weekend, because football wasn't a thing then. Whereas now we get all the games live. Every Saturday at the equivalent of 3 o'clock, because you don't go against the gate in England. We can see all those games. We can choose which games we want. So it's relatively easy to follow, other than the fact it's in the middle of the night, as you were pointing out to, that you're at the wrong time, But look, there's a lot of coverage here.
What about the feeling? I think that was what Tim's question.
Yeah, look, it's hard. Like, I'm a member of a supporters group here, the Arsenal Sydney supporters group. Yeah, look, I miss the banter. I do miss that. I miss the rivalry. You win something, you go out in the street, and no one cares. Do you know what I mean?
I've had that in the States. I was sent to the States when Wenger came in and we were winning doubles and everything, and it's you're getting really excited, and then you've got to go to work. And it's just like, what? So no, I do miss all of that. And we would have my group of friends and we'd have our routines, and, I'm sure, Tim, the same thing, that when you go to White Hart Lane or to the new stadium, where it is now, you have your routines and all of that goes, and you lose that contact. And yeah, we have WhatsApp groups and we have all of those kind of things, but there isn't that instantaneous thing. I remember relatively recently in 2017, we went to the cup final, Chelsea. The last time we won something in front of a crowd, and I'm like in my 50s now. And when again, the slow motion goal, the Ramsey header is a slow motion goal where the ball, we've dominated the game. We're 1-0 up and Chelsea equalised, and they've not been in the match. And they had a player sent off, and then suddenly they've scored. But you kind of think, this is not, we're not going to lose this. And Giroud crosses the ball and I'm not watching Ramsey running onto it. And you can see from where we are, it's behind the goal. It's an open goal if he connects. And again, that slow motion thing happens and you go crazy. And my cousin, who I go to games with, Gavin, he's like looking around for, where am I? I'm lying on the floor, just in absolute, in my 50s. And you have those moments that just,
and you don't get them here, obviously, watching it in the middle of the night, where, watching England in the Euros last week, where we're sitting there, my wife and I are sitting there on the sofa, and England score, and it's, a mental moment, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning here. Because it's right at the start of the game, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning. Tim, I'm sure you get a lot of this, and you're kind of looking around, and then I look out there for like the last 2 weeks, and there's a balcony, and it's got an Italian flag on it. It's directly in front of me. And I'm thinking, he's probably thinking he's the only person that, that knows what's going on. I'm sitting here and he's rubbing it in. There are those random little things that happen.
Listen, the best is still to come on this podcast, because Richard Roberts, our guest, is also famously the person behind a innovative record company, Too Pure. It was the record company that introduced us to the amazing PJ Harvey, and I've got a connection there which I might get a chance to talk to you about. So your music, Richard.
Well, I grew up in punk London. It's one of those. I'm just like, I'm 78, Susie and the Banshees, all of those things are starting to happen.
Hang on, 78, punk was over by then, trust me.
No, okay, I know you got 20 years.
I'm a couple of years older than you, and I have to pull rank.
I'll call it post-punk then. Okay, 78, I'm going, but I'm a teenage kid looking for a voice, and growing up in North London, and, I was going to Arsenal, and you would see Lydon and Sid Vicious at games, standing outside Arsenal Stadium before I knew who they were. There were these guys, and I'm thinking, oh my God.
They look different.
They look different. And there was also this gang at Manor House Station dressed as, which I didn't know at the time was the Clockwork Orange thing. Yeah, and that's their gang,
That's right.
And they're running around, and it's just like, whoa, and so suddenly there's these guys singing in this North London accent, and I'm like, I get this. And so I'm a kid of punk and inspired by all of those things, McLaren, you can be whatever you want to be. Yeah. And if he hadn't said that, as growing up in a one-parent family in North London, maybe I don't ever go on to do these things, but he said that thing, and you can be what you want to be. So I set up a little label in the early 90s, with a friend of mine. We've been going to see a whole Manchester things happening. Nothing's going on in London. Everyone seems to have disappeared. And we're running a little venue, and there's all these great bands. And it's just like, okay, well, let's go and live that punk ethic. And so we set up a little independent label, put the first record out, did quite well. John Peel was a real big advocate for what we were doing, put the second record out. And by this band, the Faith Healers, the first 2 records. And we get to the third records that we're recording, and where we're working in music distribution. And the companies run out of money. Our records weren't distributed there, but they were paying our wages, which was paying for these records. And so I realized we had 30 days worth of credit, and we had a third Faith Healers single recorded, and a band called Stereolab, who are still mightily influential, and I really loved them, and they wanted us to put a record out with them. And we had this tape by this girl, PJ Harvey, and so we had 30 days worth of credit, and the only option, of course, with 30 days worth of credit and 3 records, is to put them all out at the same time. So because we knew we couldn't spread it, so we put them all out at the same time. And you're getting John Peel on the phone. I'll never forget this. It's when he went to his weekend shows, and he's phoning me up on Sunday afternoon, and my girlfriend at times going, John Peel's on the phone. I'm like, yeah, right. It's like, yeah, John Peel's on the phone. I'm like, yeah, and I'm putting the phone down, and I think the second call I take, and I hear this voice. I'm like, yeah, who's this? And it's John Peel, and I'm just like, no. Put the phone down. So for the third time, we don't even pick the phone up. We go straight to the answer phone. It's like little tape. I've got the tape somewhere. This is John Peel at BBC Radio 1. You can phone me back on this number to check. This will take you through to the switchboard, ask to be put through to me urgently. Okay. And so I'm thinking, and John Peel never gets upset. And I'm phoning him up, and he's upset. And he's just like, what can you tell me about the new Faith Healers thing? I really love it. I'll be playing that tonight, and playing. But what can you tell me about this PJ Harvey? Is it a person or a band? I'm like, I don't know. It's like, I've only ever met 3 people. They're all in a band. So I'm assuming it's a band. And you need to, because he's upset, you need to know more about what you're doing. But he then calls us back. He plays the record, calls us back the next day. And we had kind of run out of money because I said these things, calls us back the next day and literally mentors us for 6 months, gives us access to his producer, says, what do you need me to do? Because what you are doing with these 3 acts really matters and it's really special, you know, because the music scene at that point was kind of struggling. The rock band thing was kind of dead and there was nothing, the independent scene hadn't really been born. And so, you know, for that era anyway, Britpop hadn't arrived and no one was really selling that many records. And we were this little label with 3 bands. And then we got in Ivo at 4AD, who was a huge hero of mine, phoned us up as well and kind of said, come in for a chat. And so we met him before a show when one of our bands that we were working with, Moonshake, we were playing at the Borderline, supported by PJ. And he was like, wanted to sit down and have a chat with him. So we had a chat with him. And he says, look, I'm going to LA tomorrow. I'll call you when I get back. I just wanted to meet you just to find out what you're about, because I know that you're working with a lot of interesting things. I'm hearing a lot of things about you. And I just wanted to make sure you didn't want to own an airline, you know, because he was referring to Branson. Go to the show. At the end of the show, he comes up to us and goes, I'll call you in the morning. And it's just like, right, what has he seen there? You know, because he's clearly seen something. And we did a deal, like I'm so honored to even say to this day, the only label deal that 4AD ever did, and this iconic label, the Cocteau Twins and the Pixies and all of this incredibly important stuff, was with Little Old Too Pure to help us through that period and then give us licensing for, you know, globally for what we needed to do and give us a choice. We didn't have to do any of it. We didn't want to. He says, I'd go up to him and say, what do you think we should be doing here? And he'd give me options, but he'd never tell me what to do. You know,
I think that album that you did with PJ Harvey, was it Dry?
Dry,
yeah, I think that's the best thing that she's done. She may not agree with that. She's done a lot of brilliant stuff. I was going to mention the drummer who she uses now, Kenrick Rowe, is my wife's drummer, you know, and but obviously PJ Harvey can play him a lot better than my wife. And he tells us very fondly about, you know, what the difference is between, you know, he's played with a lot of reggae bands. It was Sugar Minott, the late, great Sugar Minott, told him to concentrate on drums because he was actually a guitarist initially. And then, you know, Sugar Minott's drummer was absent one day and he just said, I'll play drums for you. And Sugar Minott said to him, no, you have to play drums. Drums is your instrument. Play drums. Anyway, he's an amazing drummer. And I've got a lot of respect for her because she's pulled a drummer. A lot of black drummers nowadays don't get a look in the sort of wider rock scene. They did in the 50s in the rock and roll scene, and obviously they do in jazz, but they're somehow marginalized within the rock scene. They're not seen as being.
It's that big fiction, isn't it? This always drives me wild because that rock, as it's understood, didn't exist before '68, and all of it, the building blocks of in order to get there are all black music. And then once you start this tradition, it's like then the lie kicks in that it's a tradition that's been there always, and it's somehow an entirely separate tradition from black music. So I remember the Rolling Stones audience in the States booing them when they came out with Miss You.
Yeah, all of the influence taken from all of those blues records and the records from the South, where, you know, and they're all coming into Liverpool as well. So a lot of those back are only talking about Liverpool tonight and the Beatles and their influence and things like that, where they're all taking that music. PJ is hugely influenced by a lot of that stuff from the South. And
well, she's a blues artist in my view, to be honest. A very experimental, if that's the right word, blues artist, but she's amazing. But when you break it down, there's a lot of blues going on. Incidentally, there is, and you know, we always look at the charts, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we look at the charts of the time. So we talk about 26th of May 1989. Unsurprisingly, what's at number 1 in the charts is the charity single for the victims, Hillsborough victims' families, Ferry Cross the Mersey, featuring Jerry Marsden, as you'd expect, Paul McCartney, Holly Johnson, the Christians. I could tell you about all of those people at some point or other. But interestingly enough, lower down in the charts, I can't find exactly where it is at the moment, there is a track by a group that brings this conversation together, which is Living Colour. Living Colour is they're in the charts somewhere. I know. Living Colours is Black American rock band, essentially. Although the lead guy of it, Vernon Reid, the guitarist lead guy, is actually a British guy, but he grew up in Britain, then was taken over to the States as a young guy. But what they've done, what they did at the time when they were really successful at this time, was that they basically kicked the door down. I don't even think they were, particularly the best rock band around. They weren't that, but they were people.
They were number 89, Dotun. So it's a long way. It's a long way down that list.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, with Cult of Personality.
Yeah,
but they crystallized this conversation in a way, saying that, look, hang on, rock belongs to us as well. And that was the one thing that was missing in the punk era, apart from X-Ray Specs, of course, with the late great Polystyrene. You didn't see any black contribution to punk rock, and I can
only through the reggae.
I was about to say. I was about to say.
Peel was a big supporter of a lot of that stuff.
100%.
At that time, Steel Pulse and people like that. I'm learning about those bands.
Delroy Washington. Peel was, Delroy Washington died last year tragically from COVID, and it breaks my heart still. He was an amazing guy. Did 2 albums on Virgin. I heard Delroy Washington first through John Peel, because Delroy Washington was the foundation for Aswad, you could say. In fact, Aswad's drummers playing on his records. But the 2 tunes, or at least the one tune I remember the punks used to love back in 77, came out on a 12-inch on Virgin, was a tune by Delroy Washington called Give All the Praise to Jah. And the reason why the punks loved it was because it was as simply, they could do the Skinhead Moon Stomp to it, because remember, you're coming from pogoing. How do you transition then into doing a cool reggae dance like some of these guys? But
look, there was also the bits and pieces that you'd get thrown by the Clash covering Please Be. And
Two-Tone was punk, really.
Yeah. Two-Tone was punk, reggae cross. That was actually sat right in the middle of it. So, Dotun, maybe that's the link.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, actually. When you think about it, it is Two-Tone that brought it in, as it were. And
what's Gangsters about? The first special single, Bernie Rhodes Knows, Don't Argue. They'd all been tied up with Bernie Rhodes of the Clash. So when Two-Tone does grow, definitely out of punk, and then finds a way of multi-racializing it.
But when you're looking at this charts in 1989, Richard, I said with the football, we're coming to the end of an era. Thankfully, 1989, we are coming to an era of particularly that frustrating drum sound from the 80s. By the 90s, we're never going to hear that again. But when you look at the charts, what do you think about?
When I look at this chart here that's given from this week, I'm thinking, thank God I can't really remember much. To be honest with you, I'm looking at this, and of course you but I don't know the Kylie track, which is at number 2. I know the Natalie Cole track there, and then I go down and thinking, the Bangles, because they came out of a little bit out of the new wave scene. I can remember Deacon Blue, but you've also got Debbie Gibbs, you've got Midnight Oil, big Australian band there. So look, I'm looking at Transvision Vamp coming up through. So there's some interesting things, but the chart itself I don't find at all interesting, apart from what was at number 1. It's like it's interesting to remember that those things were happening at that point.
Got to give a big shout out to Tone Loc, who's an amazing rapper, but he was on a label not unlike your label here in the UK. He was on Delicious Vinyl, and Delicious Vinyl were run by these 2 young white college dudes. I think they were initially from New York, but they moved out to LA, and I went to see them when I was living out there. And they were so grateful to me because I'd worn a T-shirt, a Delicious Vinyl T-shirt. I used to get the freebies from the record companies, and I was a music writer. And I'd worn a Delicious Vinyl T-shirt on this interview that I'd done with the LA Times. So I gave them amazing publicity. So when I arrived there, they were like, "Oh wow, it's you! Oh, thank you." But totally.
There's little ways of publicising records in those days really mattered, like the
really mattered. No, I was going to say Tone Loc, Funky Cold Medina Hair, and before that, The Wild Thing. What they did essentially was put rock to rap music, and it was so innovative and nobody had ever heard it. The mix was kind of like electro mixing in a rap sense, but the actual, you had some dirty lead guitars playing on, Funky Cold Medina or Wild Thing. It wasn't original, but in a way it hadn't been heard within rap, which was a very much closed club, if you like, that you had to do it this way, whether it was New York or LA or whatever. And Tone
There is a record that I'm noticing in this chart here that I actually worked on, because prior to going into owning a label, I'd been working in distribution, which I was talking about, and I was working on this Double Trouble record that's here in the chart. So Desire was a label that we distributed at the point, and I remember, Double Trouble and the Rebel MC and Candy Flip doing a cover version.
Yes.
Of Field. These were records that we were working on. We're working on distribution in many ways, like what you're talking about there with the Delicious Vinyl. A lot of the thing about the rave, like we talked about punk a little bit earlier, one of the really interesting things about the rave scene was it was really truly punk when we were working on it, because people were making these records in their bedrooms, pressing up all these white vinyl records that we were then supposed to be distributing, but then we'd go to place, we'd go to sell them, and no one would be wanting them because those kids had sold them out of the back of the van over the weekend before we to the release date on Monday. And of course, the whole thing about that rave thing, what it also did was, it broke the licensing rules about, partying in a field and going, and whereas the whole punk rebellion thing really kind of didn't change that much.
No, on reflection, maybe not. And, it was only a short period. Punk was so short-lived, but I will say
it changed all our lives, doesn't it?
It did.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It did. And our attitudes to things as well, and our cynicism to a certain extent to big authority and so on, although that's always been there. There is one other comparison with the rave scene, and I think you're absolutely right to make it. Do you know, when punk came out, and I remember this so distinctly, in 1976, going to Rock On Records, which was in Camden Town.
I remember it, yeah.
Right next to the tube station. It was a record store that I'd been going to like as a 12-year-old when I was a teddy boy, because that's where you got all your 50s records. So now I went back, and this 50s rock and roll record shop, which is now sort of a Dr. Martens shoe shop, 50s rock and roll record store, was selling punk. But all they did was that they had one box, because punks had started sort of coalescing around Camden Town, around Sloane Street, Sloane Square as well, and a couple other places. But because Camden Town had this market that just started up, it was a perfect place for punks to sort of congregate and so on. So they had one box full of punk records in 1976. And in that box, there was only about 3 records. New Rose by the Damned, I remember very clearly, because I bought all 3. New Rose by the Damned, Fascist Dictator by the Cortinas, which is these young teenage kids out of Bristol. And I can't remember what the third one was. The point I'm making is, as Don Letts realized when he was a DJ at the Roxy Club, the sort of dread DJ at the Roxy Club, there weren't very many punk records to play at the beginning. So you've got to
fill it with some content.
Exactly. You've got a movement, but you haven't got the musical soundtrack to go with it. So hence why punk suddenly started playing music, recording music out their garages, or we're a garage band, etc. And the same for the rave movement, because the rave movement comes out of the Chicago house movement. Chicago house movement, like a lot of these musical movements from the United States, they're somewhat formal, So I went to DJ International in Chicago, and it was like, I expected it to be like punk, but it wasn't. It was like, oh, right, so here's Fast Eddie. Oh, yes, and here's Joe Smooth. It was kind of like, it wasn't quite what I expected it to be. Whereas here, we did something that was more creative and more of our own, but it was directed to that audience that didn't have their own soundtrack, as it were. That happens with musical movements quite a lot. Have to give a big shout out as well to Soul to Soul for obvious reasons.
It was their summer when we just this chart.
I noticed them there as well. Absolutely, yeah.
It just catches them between as it keep on moving, going, and Back to Life is coming.
Yeah,
but they were just everywhere in the long hot summer of '89, weren't they?
A couple of other decent things in the charts, if I might say so. Voodoo Ray, a guy called Gerald, was just an amazing track that I still can't categorize. I don't know where it belongs in, but it is one track that ain't ever going to go away, and it's lasted the stretch of time as well. What else would I go with? Well, Lazy Itis by the Happy Mondays. How can you go wrong with that, eh?
I mean, it's interesting you say that, and you're talking about Voodoo Ray there, because I've been to see the Stone Roses at Alexander Palace. They played this really big show there. It's around this time, and there's all of these buses coming in to North London from Manchester, and somehow I have a ticket to go to the Stone Roses. And I think it's around the time that Fool's Gold has come out. So there's this really big show that they're putting on. And a guy called Gerald is kind of there DJing. So he kind of fits into that scene that's going on in Manchester. So it's interesting that you then mentioned the Happy Mondays, because I really remember hearing Voodoo Ray thinking, this is something at that point, something quite different. What is this now going to lead us to? And then he crops up DJing. And the first time I've been to see a gig where there's no support band, it's a DJ. And it's something, okay, this is a different thing now happening. And it's him.
Yeah, I think it's the end of an era for music, but the beginning of another era. And part of the new era is that it's the rave scene that's going to dominate for the next decade. And good on it as well. I think, for every reason, all the right reasons.
Well, you don't need a band anymore to make music, do you?
Yeah, no.
You can do. One person with a computer can do everything that a band used to do.
DIY, the DIY ethos I was talking about before, where literally that punk thing didn't change anything, but the kids able to make the records in their bedrooms and then sell them out of the back of a van on a weekend, and then coming and getting upset at us. Why isn't the record charting? It's like, because you've sold 10,000 copies on white label over the weekend with no markings on it, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, although there is a precedent as well. You could argue that reggae DJ music, MC music was like that as well, going to sound systems. And then when rap started out as well, you suddenly went to see some bloke. I mean, I remember going to see LL Cool J. It was LL Cool J, Eric B, Rakim, and Public Enemy. Public Enemy were the first on. They were the way down on the bill. And going to see them at the Hammersmith Odeon it was, and each of them just had a DJ with them. So LL Cool J had a huge sort of symbolic beatbox there, and he walked in with his Kangol hat and his stride and everything, but it's just like him and a DJ behind it. My DJ, play it for me. Mama said knock you out, or whatever it was. I don't think he'd recorded that one then. It was the same with Eric B and Rakim, because I remember going there with this very sort of prim and proper English woman who was a music journalist, and she's like, I don't get this. What is this about? I expected to see a band. I'm seeing some blokes riding up and down the stage and, some DJ behind him. What is this? And I had to point to two kids because I couldn't quite explain it to her. I found it so funny. I pointed to two young kids in front, and I said, would you mind just explaining to her, why this is interesting? And they were like, yeah, it's just the way he sounds, Obviously she still didn't get it at the end of it. Yeah. But yeah, that was what, and I bet they loved it, all those rappers, because you didn't have to share your money with, 5 or 6 other guys.
Absolutely, all the
you've still got to pay security of the first world, haven't you? If you're Public Enemy.
If you're Public Enemy, yeah. But apart from the rest of them, didn't have to have the security. They just said, "Stuff that. I'd rather get stabbed." Forget the security in the first.
And look, I remember around this time when we were releasing records and trying to do this slightly different thing. And Britpop, I don't think has quite arrived. But you then see the NWA video, and that's the video is itself is a game changer, and it's just like, okay, we're in for this whole other thing that you're talking about. It happened previously with Public Enemy, and then there's NWA, and it's one of those things of where I was talking to Interscope. We, as they would go in and licensing records and talking to Interscope, and then you watch Straight Outta Compton, and I'm like, oh God, I remember, because that was a parallel time to what we were doing. I remember meeting, him and Ivy or whatever it was, talking about licensing, and him saying that I know you're a really cool label. We need to be talking to you. What you got? And I'm looking around thinking, I don't think we got anything you want. And the same at Arista, that's that one extreme, as in I'm thinking they're way too cool for us. And the other extreme when Arista, get this message that, when you're going into for your record companies for licensing deals in New York, pre-mobile phones, everywhere you're going, you've got to call this number. Phone the number. Arista, and it was Arista Records. Can you come in and see us? And I'm sitting there in the foyer, and they're dealing in diamonds, and it's Whitney Houston's label, and you kind of think, and then you sit, the A&R guy comes and sits you down and say, right, what have you got? And the same thing, nothing that you want.
I think if you'd got to Dre, who was my closest friend when I lived in Los Angeles, if you'd got to Dre himself rather than Jimmy Iovine, he would have probably understood that if that he could do something with the music that you were putting out.
Okay.
That, you know, well, whether it's to remix it, to use it, to sample it, or even to repackage it, I think he would have understood because he was so eclectic.
We've got a lot of interesting things happening because we eventually licensed the whole label to American, which is Rick Rubin's label there. Rick did not understand it. He would never have pretended to. But there was a guy called Mark Geiger who kind of had set up this thing called Lollapalooza and works at IMF now. But he, you know, Perry Farrell was the front person, but it was Mark's thing. You know, well, that's what he told me anyway. And I'm wanting to believe him. And he had licensed us in. And basically, what do you want? And actually, when you doing those deals, the break clause is what the options were all ours. He wrote them in for us. So when Mark left and Rick didn't want to put the next record out, and this is the time that American are doing Johnny Cash, and I remember being at a showcase for Donovan. He was wanting to do Donovan, so I got invited to this Donovan showcase, and I'm sitting there, like the English guy at this table with all these names and Anthony Kiedis' name and all this, and people come up to me and say, "Why are you in this table?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm waiting for Mark to show," and then Rick shows, and he's sitting there, and then I don't know who these people are. Why are you in the table with Anthony Kiedis? He's the Chili Peppers singer, but I don't know that until he walks in, because they're, to me, a big American mainstream band, you know. And I'm watching the Donovan, and Rick comes over and he goes, "So what do you think?" He's so calm. "So what do you think? Like, of Donovan or what you're doing?" Or, you know, but Mark had written this deal where we got all up. So when we decided, or Rick decided he didn't want to take up the next option because Mark had gone, we got a load of money. It's like we got paid out to walk away. So there's these great little things, that these mad things happening. And
I think Rich, we're going to have to call your shirt now. It's not an Arsenal shirt. We're going to have to call it Mellow Yellow.
Oh, very nice. That's the Canaries then, is it?
They've gone for it this season. It's partly why I wore this one, because the new away shirt for this season is clearly a tribute to this, you know. But like a lot of this stuff that we've spoken about tonight are just great. Thank you for the opportunity to do so, because I say I'm here and I don't get the opportunity to talk about this stuff very much. So, you know, this game, the music, it's great to look back at this.
We'll have another opportunity to invite you back on, and we'll think of another iconic Arsenal game, and feel free to point one out to us if you think we've missed one as well, and go back as far as you like.
It won't be the 2006 Champions League final, Tim.
I was in Jamaica for that one.
It won't be the 1901 semi-final, but it could be the 1993 one.
Oh, very nice. Tottenham will be happy about that. So it's been a pleasure, honestly, Richard Roberts. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it, because, you know, it's great to get this opportunity, because you hear it, like when you hear podcasts and it's the same people consistently, and you don't hear different stories, you know, about what happened. And I was really intrigued when I got offered this. And I was like, God, yeah, there are these other stories out there about these same matches that never get told, you know, and to tell this from, a supporter's perspective about what it was like being in that ground that night, because the players have a very set view, the media have a very set view, but their experience is quite different to when you're walking up, you know, as Tim talking about the supporters outside the ground, you know, just, you know, where we park the minibus, the desire to get up there early to play the game against the Liverpool fans, and don't forget the free petrol. Don't forget the free petrol. But there really was a moment there, you know, where there was a lot of empathy amongst the supporters, because we all knew, as Tim pointed out, and I'm sure you got the same thought, it could have been any of us that had happened to. We'd all had those experiences, you know, and when you're in that ground, and if we win 1-0 and we don't get the title, we just leave, and we saw a great game and we won the game, you know. So it was an amazing moment, and I really would like to thank you for the opportunity to give a different perspective on this, because I've really enjoyed this.
Excellent. That's it.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And it was the